is Ellen, and you're watching Living Stories Productions. Today I'm going to be reading you a story about two crocodiles, one named Barry and one named George. They're going on a camping adventure and they meet a few surprises along the way. Keep watching to find out who they meet.
Barry and George Go Camping by Gerrard O'Driscoll. Barry and George are brothers, and like most brothers, they don't always get on. In fact, they never got on. You'd expect that they would live far away from each other, but in fact they lived in the same town, down the same street, even in the same house. Well, almost. Barry lives one side and George lives the other. George is a very dapper crocodile, always very smartly dressed, with a waistcoat, top hat and walking cane. And as for his house, that is perfect. The garden gate was beautifully painted. The grass is manicured, just like a golf course. The front door was so polished you could see your reflection. And the windows so clean, it was like there was no glass at all. You can just imagine the inside, a place for everything, and everything in its place. Barry, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. He was unbelievably scruffy. His cardigan was full of holes, his hat was torn, and his shoes were covered in mud. As for the house, the garden gate was broken, you couldn't see the path of the overgrown grass, and the front door looked like it was about to fall off. And the windows, you couldn't see out for the dirt. That was the outside, just imagine the inside. It looked like a giant had picked the house up, shaken it, and put it down. It was a disaster. But they were still brothers, and they both knew that if one of them had a serious problem, the other would help. So once in a while they would do something together. It usually involved competition, and usually one of them being a bad loser. But nevertheless, they were still brothers. So one afternoon they were chatting over the garden fence, which was broken on Barry's side, about what they should do. They had done many things, but never gone camping. Most people either love or hate camping, but there was only one way to find out, and that's go. The next day they both went out and brought their tents and camping equipment. As usual, Barry was relying on George to bring everything. And he was right. George brought the lot. Tent, sleeping bags and camping stove, even down to the tea bags. They agreed to meet the next morning at the bus stop at 8 o'clock to catch the bus to the station. They had planned to go to the coast and camp somewhere near the sea and some woods. George, knowing his brother would cause an argument over the bus fare and upset the other passengers, planned to miss the bus and skateboard down to the station. He'd been practicing for weeks, making sure Barry never found out. "This time I won't be embarrassed by Barry again," he thought. The next morning he packed up his backpack, grabbed his skateboard, making sure to put on his helmet and arm pads, and rushed outside before Barry could catch up. Off he skated down to the path, across the zebra crossing, through the shopping arcade, being careful not to bump into any shoppers, down the hill all the way to the train station. He looked at his watch, which read 8:15. Chuckling to himself, he thought, "Barry will be ages. Right about now he'll be thrown off the bus without me to help him." He was just about to chuckle again when he looked up and saw Barry, standing next to the ticket counter looking at his watch. "Barry, what are you doing here?" said George. Barry explained that he'd gone to catch the bus at 6 o'clock to get the cheap fare, but not wanting to spend any money, he went on his scooter instead. Well, a scooter he found dumped in his garden. He hadn't noticed before because the grass was so overgrown, and only found it when he tripped over it and hurt his foot. "George," still reeling from Barry arriving before him, stomped off to get their tickets. Fortunately, the train was very quiet, so Barry didn't have anyone to annoy. Still, it didn't stop him complaining about anything and everything. When they arrived, they got a local bus down to the coast and found somewhere to camp. It was on a farm, and the farmer was very helpful, giving them all sorts of advice on where to go and what to see. Although he was somewhat surprised to see 2 crocodiles carrying a tent. As they sat on the grass drinking their tea, Barry asked George if they could go for a swim. "I don't think so. We're freshwater crocodiles, remember, and the sea is full of salt. Let's go and explore the woods instead." Off they went for a walk. As they walked, they both saw a cottage in the distance. This is turning into a fairy story, they both thought. Getting closer, it was just an old stone cottage that had been abandoned years ago. There was nothing inside, and it was all overgrown. Phew, they both thought, as it was becoming a bit creepy. Off they went further into the woods. Then suddenly, they both stopped. In the distance, they could see what looked like a huge bear. It didn't seem very grisly, so they moved closer. Unbelievably, it was holding a tennis racket. A huge bear holding a tennis racket. "What are the chances of that?" they both said. About as much chance as 2 crocodiles wandering through a wood, they supposed. As they moved closer, they saw another bear, also holding a tennis racket, and a smaller bear umpiring at the side of a court. They were playing tennis. Barry and George just stared, and then looked at each other, then stared again. Finally, the 2 bears noticed they had a crowd. The bears turned, looked, then carried on with their game. Barry and George watched for about 5 minutes, then decided to go, quickly. As they walked, they got faster and faster until they reached their tent. They sat for an hour in complete silence, sipping their tea. Then they ate dinner, again in silence, and went to bed. The next morning was beautiful, with sunshine and cool sea breeze. But neither noticed. They were too busy thinking about the bears playing tennis. Was it a dream? There was only one way to find out. Go and look again. Off they went, wandering into the woods. They saw the cottage, walked on past, and suddenly there was one of the bears, sitting down this time. As they got closer, they saw the other bear sitting opposite, and on the table was a chessboard. They were playing chess. Barry and George were so fixated on this, they couldn't help but walk closer and closer, until they were standing right next to them. Eventually, both the bears looked up, then back at the board. After a few minutes of complete silence, which seemed like hours, one of the bears said, "My dear fellow, would you like a game?" Barry and George just stared, turned to each other, trying to work out whether each other was about to laugh or run. Then slowly said in unison, "Yes, but I don't know the rules. Can you teach us?" "My dear chaps, this is the game of champions, and you both look like champions to me. Pull up a chair next to me and my bro, and we'll teach you how to win." The end.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the story. If you would like to help support our channel, please subscribe so we can continue to make lots more children's stories. If you want to see more from Barry and George, keep an eye out over the next few weeks.